The History of Western Philosophy by Bertrand Russel. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Dragon Cave. My name is David, and today we're going to be talking about the History of Western Philosophy by Bertrand Russel and my personal experience with it. Now, I consider myself to be just an average guy. I'm a truck driver. I did graduate from high school and did a little bit of college where I wanted to be a physicist, specifically a physics teacher. But I don't consider myself a philosopher, and I got this audiobook and listened to it at the recommendation of my mother. And I have to say this was the most disappointed I've ever been in, probably in myself, but in a book that I thoroughly enjoy and highly recommend everybody read. So let me explain. We have this word, philosophy, that we use to explain things that we label philosophical, and I thought as a layperson that I understood what that meant. That I had a general, vague, uneducated, but my finger can be somewhere on what philosophy actually was. And after reading this book, I was wrong. I realize now that the way that philosophy is used in common parlance is completely just wrong on so many levels. So I came up with this analogy about how it works. So I thought philosophy was similar to a jet airplane, like a jet fighter, an F-16, right? And in this, what I mean is, I thought that it was made of metal. It had glass. It had a jet engine. It was so many feet long, so many feet tall, so many thousands of pounds. It flew through the air. There was a cockpit. There was a jet engine. I don't know how they work. I don't know how to fly planes. Its general purpose is of a military vehicle, as it were. These are things that you can understand about a jet airplane or an F-16 if you just have eyes and look and try to see and things like this. And try to make associations by the way other people talk about it, and with your experiences put together and summation of what you think this thing is. When we say, F-16 jet airplane and whatnot, you can visualize it, you can sort of understand it. And this is how I thought about philosophy. I thought that as a layperson, I knew about philosophy similar to how I knew about jet airplanes, through distant experience and somewhat, attempt to try and deduce things from other things, right? And it turns out that after having sat through listening to the history of Western philosophy, philosophy is actually more like a tree frog. Its connection with a jet airplane doesn't exist on almost every level. There are certainly some things like jet airplanes and tree frogs are both made out of atoms and are like affected by the laws of gravity, but that's about where their similarities end. And this is what disappointed me the most when I completed my first listen to it. I'm going to go through and listen to it a second time just to make sure that I really didn't miss anything. Although, as the author points out at some point, there's a lot of stuff not to miss. I'll explain that later. But a tree frog and a jet airplane don't really have a whole lot in common except for some of their most fundamental parts. They're made of atoms. They evolved on Earth. Basic observations about them. But when it comes to what they do, how they function, where they came from, and why they're here, and all these other kinds of things, my layperson understanding of philosophy was so wrong as to be embarrassing and lamentable. And I was disappointed in this because it seemed like I felt stupider than I was, because once you really start to dig into it, you understand you really do know a little bit more about it, but it's just been presented in a very horrible way throughout your life. But this book, reading that, disabused me of many, many, many of the misconceptions I had about what exactly is or was philosophy and where it's at. For one thing, it should be noted that what we in the modern world call philosophy and what philosophy has historically been is almost unrecognizable between the two. Because up to about 200 years ago, it seems, philosophy was a little more than just a very clever way for intelligent people to convince themselves that their religions aren't just crazy. They had things like the Socratic method, but these were just engines of misapplied principles that were engines of generating nonsense, illogical ends to just about everything, really. And even, like I said, the author himself pointed out that after after the rise of Christianity and pretty much through all of it, there really wasn't much philosophical development. It was like 2,000 years of just dead. It was, spinning its wheels. Philosophy kind of just went nowhere. He does an admirable job of going through the various philosophers of the last 2,000 years and pointing out how they either properly or improperly applied or misapplied the teachings of the Greek, uh, you know, fathers of philosophy and whatnot, and their methods. But what they came up with in their exercises was fundamentally useless because about 200 years ago, 150, 200 years ago, philosophy began to change into something that ancient philosophers would scarcely even recognize as philosophy, as it became more tied to science and the observable universe and the scientific methods and things like that began to chip away at many of the mysteries that philosophy had been, so preoccupied with. And so, really, right at about when Nietzsche shows up is when philosophy started to evolve into what we think of it as today. And it's sort of why it's disappointing, but it definitely makes it interesting to look at the way that the word philosophy and the concept of philosophy is used today. This is just a way of thinking. There's a philosophy of football, a philosophy of craft brewed beer. There's a philosophy of spaghetti. It seems to have been gutted of all of its actual meaning that uh, or not that's actual meaning, but the meaning that had been mostly used up until about 200 years ago, which was, like I said, it's kind of a really fancy way for intellectuals of the time to continue to believe in their religions. Just really bizarre explanations for their observations or very convoluted reasoning behind certain things. This is where you find, the Epicurean type challenges to the existence of gods and or singular gods or what have you, and things to that nature that kind of just went nowhere for 2,000 years before philosophy and science got to a point where they started to really link together and whatnot. So I have to say that it was confusing until it wasn't confusing, which is confusing in its own right. It starts off really laying the foundations of what philosophy was because the Greeks practically invented it and perfected it, and then then the book kind of meanders through the last 2,000 years, and then we start to pick up with where we're at today. Now, I haven't read anything on modern philosophy just yet. I'm working on towards getting to that one. But as for this one, for a layperson like myself, someone who isn't, a profess, I'm professed to be ignorant of the philosophical training and whatnot. What I came away from this book was a lot of people, myself included, really don't know what philosophy is, and having peeked behind the curtain here, and seen Oz, uh, I was disappointed in how my uneducated understanding was so far off the mark, and relieved to have been disabused of those notions, and excited and invigorated to learn more. I want to see what other misconceptions are out there and whatnot. So, uh, thank you for joining me here in the Dragon Cave. I'll be doing book reviews, other musings, political commentaries, and stuff of that nature as I get this channel off the ground. Of course, as with any YouTube channel, your likes and comments help. If you have a suggestion for something you think that I should talk about next, political philosophy, if you will, or current events, like I said, I don't know where this channel's going to go. This is me just sort of broadcasting myself, and I kind of wanted to start with this one here because this one kind of really impacted me, and I kind of wanted to share that as a confessed outsider of the philosophical sciences, commenting on what is essentially a philosophy textbook that I read because I was bored, or listened to actually. I listened to the audiobook version of it. Highly recommend it. It is a great production. So, thank you for listening. Y'all have a great day, and see you next time.